Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Nathan Pierce, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2008, during what should have been a routine missing person search. But there was nothing routine about what I found in those woods or what found me. The call came in at 6:30 hours on October 15th. Ashley Turner, 23 years old, had been camping alone near the Hoh River Trail. Her scheduled check-in with her parents never came. By the time I reached the trailhead at 800, she'd already been missing for 14 hours. I remember the weight of my pack, 38 pounds of search and rescue gear, GPS unit, emergency beacon, first aid supplies. The leather of my Danner boots was still damp from yesterday's rain. Coffee steam rose from my thermos, mixing with the October mist that clung to the Douglas firs like ghostly fingers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the dreams first. 3 weeks earlier, September 24th, 2008. The nightmares started the same night we moved into our new house in Port Angeles. Sarah, my wife, said it was just stress from the relocation. Our 6-year-old daughter, Emma, was having trouble sleeping too, but for different reasons. New house, new sounds, the way shadows fell differently through unfamiliar windows. In the dreams, I was always walking through the park, but not any section I recognized. The trees were wrong somehow. Too tall, too dark, their trunks twisted in impossible spirals that hurt to look at directly. And there was always this sound, like static from an old radio, but underneath it something else. Whispers in a language that made my teeth ache just hearing it. I'd wake up with Sarah shaking me, telling me I'd been talking in my sleep. Not talking, she'd correct herself. Speaking in tongues, like those people in the Pentecostal church she'd grown up in. Words that weren't words, syllables that felt oily in my mouth even after I was fully awake. "It's just the stress, Nathan," she'd say, running her fingers through my hair. "New house, new responsibilities at work. Your body's just processing everything." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. October 15th, 2008, 09:45 hours. Ashley's campsite was pristine. Too pristine. Her North Face tent was still zipped tight, sleeping bag undisturbed, camp stove cold. But her hiking boots were missing, and her jacket was draped over a log like she'd just stepped out for a moment. The tracks led northwest, toward the restricted area near Deer Lake. Standard protocol would have me radio for backup before entering that section, but something in my gut, a ranger's instinct honed by over a decade in these woods, told me time was running short. The trail Ashley had followed wasn't on any map. Hell, it wasn't even a real trail. Just a deer path that seemed to weave between the massive western red cedars with an almost deliberate precision. The deeper I went, the more the forest felt aware, like something vast and patient was watching me from just beyond the edge of my vision. My radio started acting up around mile marker 3. Static burst through in sharp, painful bursts that made me yank the earpiece out. When I tried to use my GPS, the screen showed impossible coordinates. Negative elevations, longitude readings that placed me somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's when I heard Ashley screaming. But let me go back further. Back to the beginning. Olympic National Park, Washington, 1996. I was 24 when I first set foot in Olympic as a seasonal ranger, fresh out of college with a forestry degree and head full of romantic notions about communing with nature. The old-timers used to tell stories around the fire station about the deep woods, about sections of the park where compasses spun like tops, and experienced hikers walked in circles for days. "There are old places in these mountains," Ranger Bill Hawthorne told me during my 3rd week. Bill had been working Olympic since the early 70s, knew every trail, every creek, every quirk of weather that could turn a pleasant hike into a survival situation. Places that existed long before the Park Service, long before the loggers, long before the tribes that lived here. Places that remember when the world was different. I laughed it off then, written it off as old-timer hazing, the kind of ghost stories veterans told rookies to keep them properly cautious in the wilderness. I'm not laughing anymore. October 15th, 2008, 11:27 hours. The screaming was coming from ahead and below, echoing up from what sounded like a deep ravine. I crashed through salmonberry bushes, their thorns catching on my uniform pants, leaving thin red lines across my forearms. The sound of my own breathing was too loud in my ears, shallow, rapid pants that reminded me I wasn't as young as I used to be. When I reached the source of the screaming, I found something that shouldn't exist. The pit was perfectly circular, maybe 15 feet across, cut into the earth with surgical precision. The sides were smooth black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And the depth... Christ, I dropped a rock and never heard it hit bottom. Ashley Turner was clinging to a root system about 20 feet down, her face white with terror, dirt streaked across her cheeks like war paint. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the pit was breathing. Not metaphorically, literally breathing. The air pressure changed in a slow, rhythmic pattern, and with each exhale, something that wasn't quite wind carried strange scents up from the depths. Ozone and copper, and something organic that made my stomach clench. "Ashley," I called down. "Hold on, I'm going to get you out." She looked up at me and her eyes were wrong. Not the color, they were still brown, but the pupils were too large, too dark, like they were reflecting something that existed in a different kind of darkness than the one I understood. "It's coming," she whispered, her voice carrying impossibly well in the strange acoustics of the pit. "It's almost through. Let me tell you about my daughter Emma." October 14th, 2008, the night before. Emma had always been sensitive. Sarah called it intuition. I called it an overactive imagination. She'd wake up crying about monsters in her closet, but when I'd check, I'd find nothing but winter coats and old tennis shoes. But the night before Ashley Turner went missing, Emma crawled into our bed at 3 a.m., shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "Daddy," she whispered, pressing her small body against mine. "There's something wrong with the forest." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "It's hungry," she said, and the certainty in her 6-year-old voice made something cold settle in my chest. "And it knows you." I held her until she fell back asleep, but I stayed awake until dawn, staring out our bedroom window toward the dark tree line of Olympic National Park. Somewhere in those depths, something was waiting. I just didn't know it was waiting for me. October 15th, 2008, 1143 hours. My rescue rope was rated for 300 pounds, standard issue climbing gear that I'd used dozens of times in my career. I anchored it to the thickest cedar I could find and started my descent into the pit. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in the first 10 feet. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the metal clips on my gear became painful to touch with bare skin. But worse than the cold was the sensation that the walls of the pit were moving, shifting slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Ashley, I'm coming down to get you. Just hold tight." She was mumbling something under her breath, words in that same not language from my dreams. As I got closer, I could see that her fingernails were black, not with dirt, but with something that looked like ink. It was spreading up her fingers, following the lines of her veins beneath the skin. "How long have you been down here?" I asked, clipping a safety harness around her waist. "Since Tuesday," she said. "Or maybe yesterday. Time moves differently here. The problem was Tuesday had been 3 days ago, and she should have been dead from exposure, dehydration, any number of things. But her skin was warm to the touch, and I could smell something sweet on her breath, like honey and copper. That's when I looked down. Olympic National Park Archives, 1962. This is what I found later, buried in the old incident reports. Missing person report, James Hartwell, park ranger date, September 12, 1962. Last known location, Deer Lake Trail, mile marker 4.2. Ranger Hartwell was conducting a routine patrol when radio contact was lost at approximately 1400 hours. Search teams deployed at 1800 hours found his gear at what appeared to be a natural sinkhole approximately 200 yards off the main trail. Sinkhole was measured at 15 feet in diameter. Depth could not be determined due to equipment limitations. Ropes deployed to 150 feet without reaching bottom. Search called off after 72 hours due to incoming weather system. Note: sinkhole location could not be relocated during follow-up survey conducted October 15, 1962. Area showed no geological anomalies. Signed, Chief Ranger William Morrison. October 15, 2008, 1201 hours. At the bottom of the pit, maybe 100 feet below where Ashley clung to her root, something vast and pale was moving. I've spent 12 years in the wilderness. I've seen black bears, cougars, elk in rutting season. I know the difference between an animal and something else. This was something else. It moved like liquid mercury, flowing across what I now realized wasn't the bottom of the pit at all, but some kind of membrane stretched taut over an opening that went deeper than human understanding could follow. And it was reaching upward with appendages that weren't quite tentacles, weren't quite arms, but something that my brain refused to properly categorize. "We need to go," I told Ashley, my voice steady despite the fact that my hands were shaking so hard I could barely work the rope clips. "Right now." But as I started to haul her up, something impossible happened. The thing at the bottom of the pit spoke. Not in words, not in any language that had ever been spoken by human throats. It spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely, and suddenly I understood things that no forest ranger in Washington state should ever have to understand. The pit wasn't a natural formation, it was a door, and it had been opening slowly, for decades. James Hartwell, the ranger who'd disappeared in 1962, hadn't fallen in. He'd been called, just like Ashley had been called, just like I was being called. But there was something else in that alien communication, something that made me fight against the pull instead of surrendering to it. My family, my wife Sarah, with her terrible coffee and her habit of leaving books half open all over the house. My daughter Emma with her 2 serious eyes and her questions about why the forest felt hungry. The thing in the pit knew about them. It had been watching them, learning about the connections that tethered me to this reality, and it wanted those connections severed. That's when I felt it for the first time, a power I'd never known I possessed. What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. October 15th, 2008, 1224 hours. The power felt like electricity running through my nervous system, but instead of painful, it was clarifying. Suddenly, I could see the pit for what it really was. Not just a hole in the ground, but a wound in reality itself. And somehow, impossibly, I could feel the edges of that wound. Ashley looked at me with those 2 dark eyes and smiled. "You feel it too, don't you? The pull. It's so much easier if you just let go." The black spreading up her arms had reached her elbows. Whatever was happening to her was happening fast. "No," I said, and the word carried more weight than it should have. The pale thing at the bottom of the pit recoiled slightly, as if my refusal had actual physical force behind it. I'd never believed in psychic phenomena, ESP, any of that New Age nonsense that Sarah sometimes read about in her magazines. But standing there in that impossible pit, with reality bending around me like heated plastic, I felt something unlock in my mind. A door I'd never known existed suddenly swinging open. The rope in my hands became more than just braided nylon. It became a lifeline in the most literal sense. A connection between the world I knew and the alien darkness that wanted to swallow us both. And somehow, I could strengthen that connection. "Hold on to me, Ashley, and whatever you do, don't look down." The ascent should have been impossible. My muscles should have given out after the first 20 feet, hauling both our body weights up a vertical surface. But the strange electricity in my nervous system seemed to extend to the rope itself, making it feel weightless, responsive to my will rather than just my physical strength. Halfway up, Ashley started screaming again. Not in fear this time. In rage. October 15th, 2008, 12:47 hours. Ashley's transformation accelerated as we climbed. The black infection spread across her shoulders, up her neck, creeping toward her face like spilled ink. Her fingernails had grown longer, sharper, and when she looked at me, there were too many teeth in her mouth. "You're making a mistake," she said, but the voice wasn't entirely hers anymore. There was an echo underneath it, harmonics that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than her throat. "The door is opening whether you help or not, but if you fight it, your family pays the price." "My family is protected," I said, though I had no idea why I was so certain of that. The words came from the same place as the electricity in my nerves, the same source that was somehow letting me haul 150 pounds of dead weight up a vertical surface without breaking a sweat. "Are they?" Ashley, not Ashley, laughed. "Emma's been dreaming about us for weeks. She knows we're coming. Children are so much more receptive to our influence." The rage that filled me then was pure and clean and absolutely terrifying. I'd never wanted to hurt anyone in my life, not even the drunk hikers who left trash all over my trails or the poachers who set illegal snares in protected habitat. But in that moment, I wanted to drop Ashley Turner into the deepest part of that pit and listen to her scream all the way down. Instead, I channeled that rage into the strange power growing inside me, using it to fuel the final push to the surface. When we reached the rim of the pit, I hauled Ashley over the edge and immediately started checking her for injuries. The black infection was receding, flowing back down her arms like it was being drawn out of her body. Her fingernails returned to normal length. The extra teeth were gone. "What happened to me?" she whispered, and her voice was purely human again. I didn't know how to answer that. Hell, I barely understood what had happened to me. October 15th, 2008, 13:15 hours. The hike back to the trailhead took 3 hours, partly because Ashley was weak and disoriented, partly because I kept losing the trail. My GPS was still showing impossible coordinates, and my compass spun freely no matter which direction we walked. But there was something else guiding us now. The same instinct that had unlocked in the pit seemed to know which way led back to the familiar world. It was like following a scent through the woods, except the scent was comfort and safety and the promise of home. Ashley didn't remember much about her time in the pit. She thought she'd been down there for maybe an hour, and when I told her it had been 3 days, she looked at me like I was the one suffering from hallucinations. "I remember falling," she said as we walked. And then, voices. Like people talking in the next room, but I couldn't quite make out the words, and I was so thirsty. But there was water coming from somewhere. It tasted like metal, but it helped. I didn't tell her that there was no water source in that pit. I didn't tell her about the thing moving at the bottom, or the way reality had seemed to bend around us during the rescue. Some truths are too dangerous to share. But I did ask her one question. "Why did you go off the trail? What made you head toward that area?" She was quiet for a long time, picking her way carefully over fallen logs and moss-slick rocks. "I dreamed about it," she finally said, "for weeks before the camping trip. This beautiful place in the forest, like a hidden garden. Someone was calling to me, promising to show me something wonderful. It felt so real that when I saw the path leading that direction, I just followed." Olympic National Park Ranger Station, October 15th, 2008, 16:30 hours. The official report I filed that evening was a masterpiece of creative writing. Ashley Turner had taken an unauthorized detour from the Hoh River Trail and fallen into a natural sinkhole. She'd been trapped on a ledge approximately 20 feet down, suffering from mild dehydration and exposure. Standard rope rescue procedures were employed to extract her safely. No mention of the pit's impossible geometry, no mention of the breathing darkness or the thing that moved like liquid mercury in the depths, and definitely no mention of the strange new awareness that seemed to have awakened in my mind. Chief Ranger Morrison read the report without comment, filed it in the appropriate folder, and reminded me to update the trail hazard database with the sinkhole's location. The problem was, when the geological survey team went out 3 days later to assess the sinkhole for permanent closure, they couldn't find it. According to their instruments, There was no geological anomaly anywhere within a mile radius of the coordinates I'd provided. The pit was gone, like it had never existed at all. October 15th, 2008, 2100 hours. That night, I sat on the back porch of our new house with a beer I wasn't really drinking, watching the darkness gather between the trees. Sarah had put Emma to bed hours ago, but I could hear soft conversation coming from upstairs. My wife's patient voice and my daughter's animated whispers. Around 10:30, Emma padded downstairs in her pajamas and climbed into my lap without saying a word. She was getting too big for this, really. 6 years old and all sharp elbows and knees, but I wrapped my arms around her anyway. "The forest isn't hungry anymore," she said quietly. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" "It feels different, like it was sick before, but now it's getting better." She looked up at me with those two serious eyes. "You fixed it, didn't you, Daddy?" I didn't know how to answer that. The pit might be gone, but I could still feel the electric awareness humming in my nervous system. Still sense things moving in the deep woods that had no business moving there. The door might be closed, but I had a feeling it wasn't locked. "I helped," I said finally, "but it's going to take time to really heal." Emma nodded like this made perfect sense to her, which scared me almost as much as anything that had happened in the pit. "Will you teach me," she asked, "when I'm older, how to help fix things like that?" The question hit me like a physical blow. The idea that this strange new awareness might be hereditary, that my daughter might already be developing abilities that could put her in danger, made my chest tight with protective fear. But looking down at her calm, serious face, I realized I might not have a choice. If Emma was going to inherit whatever had awakened in me today, then she'd need to understand it. She'd need to know how to control it, how to use it responsibly, how to protect the people she loved when things from the deep dark came calling. "Maybe," I said, "when you're older, if you still want to learn." She smiled and settled more comfortably against my chest, apparently satisfied with this answer. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Emma. More than you'll ever know." Olympic National Park, present day. It's been 15 years since the incident with the dimensional pit, and I'm still working as a ranger at Olympic, still married to Sarah, still living in Port Angeles. Emma's 21 now, studying environmental science at the University of Washington, with plans to join the Park Service herself. And she's not the only one who inherited the gift. Over the years, I've met others. Rangers mostly, but also local indigenous elders who speak of old agreements made with things that live between the worlds. Scientists who study dimensional physics and quantum mechanics and other fields that are just beginning to understand what we've always known instinctively. The pit hasn't returned, but other things have tried to push through. Smaller incursions mostly. Tears in reality that last only minutes before healing themselves. But each time, there are those of us who can sense them, who can help guide them closed again. We call ourselves the Threshold Guardians, though that's probably more dramatic than necessary. Mostly, we just do our jobs. We patrol the wilderness. We help lost hikers. We monitor wildlife populations and trail conditions. And when something that shouldn't exist tries to make itself at home in our reality, we gently show it the way back where it belongs. Ashley Turner recovered completely from her experience in the pit. She went on to become a landscape photographer, specializing in the Pacific Northwest wilderness. She sends me a Christmas card every year, always with the same message: "Thank you for bringing me home." She doesn't remember the details of what happened down there, which is probably for the best. But sometimes in her photographs I can see traces of the strange beauty that exists just beyond the edge of our normal world. The way light falls differently in certain places, the shadows that suggest depth and mystery without revealing their secrets. She never did marry or have children, though, and she never camps alone anymore. I think some part of her remembers, even if her conscious mind has filed it all away under bad dream and mild hypothermia. Which brings me to why I'm telling you this story. If you're reading this, chances are you've had your own encounter with something that shouldn't exist. Maybe you've seen things moving in the corner of your vision that vanish when you look directly at them. Maybe you've felt that electric awareness starting to wake up in your own nervous system. Maybe you've started having dreams about deep, dark places that call to you with voices like honey and copper. If any of that sounds familiar, then you need to understand something important. You're not going crazy, you're not alone, and you have a choice to make. You can ignore the awakening abilities, suppress them, pretend they don't exist. A lot of people do that, and they live perfectly normal, safe lives. The things that live between the worlds usually don't bother with people who refuse to acknowledge them. Or you can accept what you're becoming and learn to use it responsibly. Learn to be a guardian, a protector, someone who stands between the everyday world and the hungry darkness that would devour it. Either choice is valid. Either choice is yours to make. But if you choose the second path, if you decide to embrace the strange new awareness growing inside you, then you need to remember the most important lesson I learned in that impossible pit 15 years ago. Love is the strongest force in any dimension. Love for your family, your community, your world. When things get dark and reality starts to bend around you, hold on to that love. Use it as your anchor. Let it guide you home, because at the end of the day, that's what we're really protecting. Not just the physical world, but the connections that make it worth protecting. The bonds between parents and children, husbands and wives, friends and neighbors and strangers who might become friends. The pit wanted to sever those connections, to isolate us and make us vulnerable. But as long as we remember what we're fighting for, as long as we hold on to each other, the darkness can never truly win. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Did I handle everything perfectly? Probably not. But Ashley Turner went home safe to her family, and the door between worlds stayed closed. In my book, that counts as a victory. So there you have it, my encounter with the unknown. Did I handle it right? What would your next move be? Tell me in the comments and subscribe if you want more supernatural stories from the forest. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 8 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2018, during what should have been a routine search and rescue operation. Should have been. But nothing in these woods is routine when the Wendigo starts hunting. I'd been looking for Tyler Matthews for 6 hours when the world started to bend. The radio crackled against my shoulder, dispatcher's voice cutting through the static. Ranger Chen, any update on the missing hiker? Over. I pressed the PTT button on my Motorola XTN 446, coordinates burning in my mind. 47.9021 degree N, 123.6044 degree W, approximately 2 miles northwest of the Sol Duke Trail Junction. Negative contact on Tyler Matthews, I responded, my breath visible in the 42-degree air. Last known position was Lover's Lane Bridge at 0800 hours. Currently searching grid section Charlie 7. 6 hours. Tyler's girlfriend Emma had called it in at dawn, voice shaking as she explained how he'd gone for an early morning photography hike and never returned to their campsite. Standard protocol dictated I should have found him by now. Olympic's trail system was well marked, and Tyler was an experienced hiker according to his permit documentation. But the tracks I was following, they didn't make sense. I knelt beside a Douglas fir examining the boot impressions in the soft earth. Merrill Moab hiking boots, size 11, consistent with Tyler's registered gear. The stride pattern showed normal gait, no signs of distress or injury. But then, 30 feet later, the prints just changed. The spacing between steps had increased from Tyler's normal 28-inch stride to nearly 4 feet. The depth of the impressions suggested something much heavier than Tyler's documented 165-pound frame, and there were other marks, claw-like scrapes in the bark of nearby trees exactly 8 feet off the ground. My Garmin eTrex GPS unit beeped softly. I'd been unconsciously walking in a perfect circle for the past 20 minutes. The skin on my forearms prickled with the sensation of being watched. Not the normal awareness that comes with 8 years of backcountry experience. This was different. Predatory. Patient. I adjusted my 45-pound pack, feeling the familiar weight of my rescue gear. 50 meters of 9mm dynamic rope, Petzl rescue harness, headlamp with extra batteries, first aid kit, emergency bivouac, and enough MREs for 3 days. My radio range was solid, GPS was functioning, and I had 6 hours of daylight remaining. Everything was normal. Everything except the photographs. I'd found Tyler's Nikon D850 hanging from a pine branch, lens cap missing, memory card intact. When I scrolled through the images on the camera's 3.2-inch LCD, my fingers went numb despite my liner gloves. The first dozen shots were standard landscape photography: sunrise over the Olympic Mountains, dewdrops on spider webs, a particularly photogenic stand of old-growth cedar. But then the images became wrong. Frame 037 showed the trail ahead, empty except for morning shadows. Frame 038, taken 3 seconds later according to the timestamp, showed the same view, but the shadows had moved, against the sun. Frame 039 captured something that shouldn't exist. A figure standing among the trees, impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that bent in too many places. By frame 041, the figure was closer. By frame 043, it was looking directly at the camera. I've seen things in these woods before. 2 years ago, during the Peterson search, I encountered something that department policy classified as wildlife interaction requiring psychological evaluation. 6 months of mandatory counseling followed, along with detailed sessions with Dr. Martinez about stress-induced hallucinations and isolation psychosis. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it was happening again. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 30 seconds. My breath turned to fog and the forest fell silent. No bird calls, no insect noise, no wind through the canopy. Even the ever-present sound of the Salt Duke River, normally audible from this elevation, had vanished. That's when I saw Tyler. He was standing approximately 200 yards ahead, perfectly motionless at the edge of a small clearing. Relief flooded through me until I raised my Bushnell binoculars and got a clear view. Tyler was facing away from me, but his head was turned completely around, looking in my direction. His eyes were solid black, and his mouth was moving silently, lips forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Come closer, Sarah. Come see what I've learned." My radio erupted in static. The GPS screen flickered and went dark. The magnetic compass on my belt began spinning wildly before settling on a bearing that pointed directly at Tyler. I knew I should call for backup. Protocol demanded it. But my radio was broadcasting nothing but electronic screaming, and something deeper than training was taking control. A awareness I'd been suppressing since the Peterson incident. A sensitivity that Dr. Martinez had tried to therapy away. I could feel it awakening, the part of me that sensed things moving between the spaces of reality. "Tyler?" I called out, my voice carrying strangely in the unnatural silence. He didn't respond, but began walking deeper into the forest with movements that reminded me of stop-motion animation. Too fluid, frames missing between positions. I followed, even though every ranger regulation and survival instinct screamed against it. My pack felt like it was growing heavier with each step, straps cutting into my shoulders despite proper adjustment. The familiar weight of my rescue gear now felt like stones. The trees were wrong. I'd hiked this section of Olympic hundreds of times, could navigate it blindfolded. But the old-growth Douglas firs I knew were being replaced by species that shouldn't exist at this elevation. Twisted deciduous trees with leaves that looked almost hungry. My watch had stopped at 2:17 p.m. The sun wasn't moving across the sky. As I pushed through a stand of those impossible trees, their branches seemed to reach for me with deliberate intent. One caught my jacket, and when I pulled free, I saw that the bark had left marks on the fabric that looked like tiny handprints. The clearing ahead opened up into something that violated the basic geography of the Olympic Peninsula. It was perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by trees that grew in a pattern too precise to be natural. In the center sat a pile of stones arranged in a spiral pattern. Tyler was standing next to it, still motionless, still wrong. "Tyler Matthews?" I called again, following protocol despite the fact that nothing about this situation appeared in any search and rescue manual. "I'm Ranger Chen with Olympic National Park. Are you injured?" He turned to face me, and I realized with crystalline clarity that whatever was wearing Tyler's body wasn't human anymore. The thing that had been Tyler smiled with too many teeth. What would you do in this situation? Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. The entity spoke with Tyler's voice, but underneath it was something else. A sound like winter wind through bare branches, like the last breath of something dying of hunger. I've been waiting, Sarah. Waiting for someone who can see. Someone who can understand. My peripheral vision was contracting. Everything except the Tyler thing becoming fuzzy and indistinct. But paradoxically, I was seeing more than I ever had before. The air shimmered with patterns that looked almost like equations, mathematical formulae written in light and shadow. The stone spiral in the clearing wasn't just rocks, it was some kind of anchor, holding open a space that shouldn't exist. You remember the Peterson search, the Tyler thing continued. You remember what you saw in Sector 9. Dr. Martinez told you it was stress, isolation, hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and responsibility pressure. I hadn't told anyone about Sector 9. Not Dr. Martinez, not my supervisor, not the incident report. The thing I'd encountered during the Peterson search was classified in my mind as never happened and never speak of this. But you knew better, it whispered. You knew you were seeing through the cracks, seeing what's always been here, in the spaces between what humans call reality. The mathematical patterns in the air were becoming clearer, and with growing horror, I realized I could read them, understand them. They were describing the fundamental structure of the forest, but not the forest as it appeared to normal human perception. This was the forest as it truly existed, a vast feeding ground stretching across dimensions, where creatures like the Tyler thing harvested human consciousness for sustenance. The Wendigo isn't what your folklore describes, it said, beginning to circle the stone spiral. With each step, its form became less Tyler-like, more elongated, joints bending in ways that defied human anatomy. It's not a cannibal curse or a winter demon. It's a hunger that exists between realities, feeding on the moment when human minds break trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. I wanted to run. Every rational thought was screaming at me to activate my emergency beacon, retreat to the trail, radio for immediate extraction. But the patterns in the air were calling to something deep in my brain, some long-dormant human sensitivity that evolution had tried to breed out of our species. I was seeing the world as it really was. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Tyler's still in here, the thing said, tapping its elongated fingers against its skull. Would you like to hear him scream? That's when Tyler's real voice broke through, just for a second, a desperate whisper. Sarah, kill me, please. The emergency training kicked in before my conscious mind could process what was happening. I dropped my pack and grabbed the bear spray from my belt, knowing it was useless but needing to do something. The canister felt warm in my hand, warmer than it should be in 40-degree weather. The Tyler thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying animals. You still don't understand. This isn't a rescue situation, Sarah. This is an invitation. The stone spiral began to glow with patterns that matched the equations floating in the air. The impossible trees surrounding the clearing started to move, their branches reaching toward the center of the circle, and something vast and hungry stirred in the spaces between the patterns. That's when I felt it, the thing inside me that had been waking up since the Peterson incident. The sensitivity that Dr. Martinez had tried to therapy away. It wasn't going dormant anymore. It was opening like a flower made of mathematics and ancient hunger. I could feel the Wendigo's true form pressing against the boundaries of this reality, using Tyler as an anchor point, but I could also feel something else. The fundamental equations that held this pocket of wrongness together. And somehow, impossibly, I understood how to solve them. My hands moved without conscious direction, fingers tracing patterns in the air that mirrored the stone spiral. The bear spray in my grip grew hot enough to burn, but I held on, channeling something that felt like electricity made of thought. The Tyler thing's expression changed from predatory amusement to genuine surprise. No, it said, voice layering into harmonics that human throats couldn't produce. You're not ready. The transition takes years of preparation. You'll burn yourself out. but I was already burning. Whatever I was channeling was consuming something essential inside me, using my life force as fuel for the mathematical equations that could collapse this pocket of twisted space. The world around me began to unravel. The impossible trees withered and cracked, revealing the actual Douglas firs that belonged in this location. The stone spiral crumbled, patterns fading from the air like smoke, and the Tyler thing began to scream as something vast and hungry was pulled back through the cracks between realities. For just a moment I saw Tyler himself, the real Tyler, trapped and terrified but alive. I saw the Wendigo as it truly was. Not a creature, but a wound in reality itself. A hunger given form by human fear and incomprehension. And I saw what I was becoming. The mathematical patterns weren't just in the air anymore. They were writing themselves directly onto my consciousness, rewriting fundamental parts of how my brain processed reality. I was gaining the ability to see and manipulate the spaces between worlds, but at the cost of being able to exist normally in this one. The collapse accelerated. The clearing returned to normal Olympic forest. Tyler's body dropped to the ground, unconscious but breathing. The Wendigo's influence snapped back to whatever dimension it had emerged from, reality sealing itself like healing skin. I caught Tyler as he fell, checking his pulse and pupil response. Alive, stable, no obvious injuries. By all standard measures, this was a successful rescue. But I could still see the patterns. Even with the Wendigo banished and the pocket of wrongness collapsed, I could see the mathematical equations that described how reality bent and flexed around points of supernatural influence. I could sense other thin places in the Olympic forest, other locations where things from between worlds had established anchor points. My radio crackled back to life. GPS reactivated. Watch resumed normal timekeeping. But I knew that everything had changed. The extraction was textbook. Tyler was airlifted to Olympic Medical Center with diagnosed exposure and dehydration. His memory of the incident was fragmented. He remembered leaving for a photography hike and then waking up in my arms in the clearing. The photographs on his camera showed only normal landscape shots. The official report listed the rescue as successful with no complications. Tyler made a full recovery and returned to his normal life. Case closed. But there was no going back for me. Dr. Martinez recommended another psychological evaluation after I mentioned unusual environmental factors during the debriefing. I didn't tell her about the patterns I could still see, about the way mathematics now floated at the edges of my vision, about how I could sense the weak points where reality wore thin. I've continued working as a ranger. The Olympic Peninsula needs someone who can see what's really out there, someone who can respond when the Wendigo and things like it start pressing against the boundaries of our world. But every time I use these new abilities, every time I look too deeply into the spaces between realities, I lose a little more of what makes me human. The patterns are beautiful and terrifying and completely addictive. I understand now why the Wendigo chose Tyler, not for his body, but for his photographer's eye, his ability to see and capture images that others would miss. The hunger isn't for human flesh, it's for human perspective, for the unique way we process and interpret reality. And every time I stop one of these incursions, I become a little less human myself, a little more like the things I'm fighting. I saved Tyler Matthews. Mission accomplished. But the cost was everything I used to be. Did you enjoy this supernatural encounter? What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales from the wilderness. My name is James Anderson, and I've been a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 15 years. What I'm about to tell you happened in October 2018, during what should have been a routine missing person search. Emma Rodriguez, a 23-year-old hiker from Seattle, had vanished somewhere along the Hoh River Trail 3 days prior. But this wasn't routine. Nothing about Emma's disappearance made sense, and by hour 6 of my search that cold morning, my frustration was eating me alive from the inside. I adjusted my Motorola radio's frequency to 155.160, the Park Service emergency channel, and checked my Garmin GPS unit for the 100th time. My coordinates read 47 to 5132.4 and 123 to 5615.6 W, roughly 2 miles northeast of the Hoh River Visitor Center. The Douglas fir canopy above filtered the October sunlight into shifting patterns that played tricks on tired eyes, and the scent of decomposing cedar mixed with the metallic tang of the nearby river. "Base, this is Unit 7. I spoke into my radio, my voice hoarse from calling Emma's name for hours. "Still no sign of the missing hiker in grid sector Charlie 4. Visibility is maybe 30 yards through this old growth. Over." The static crackled before Susan Martinez's voice came through from dispatch. "Copy, Unit 7. Any indication of trail deviation?" "Over." I stopped walking and pulled my digital camera from my uniform jacket, reviewing the photos I'd taken of the disturbed earth. "Negative on normal trail deviation, Base, but I've got some unusual disturbances about 50 yards west of the main trail." "Over." What I didn't tell Susan was how wrong those disturbances looked. The soil had been torn up in long parallel gouges, too deep and too wide for any animal native to the Pacific Northwest. And there was something else, a smell that shouldn't exist in these woods. Not the clean decay of fallen logs or the earthy richness of moss-covered ground, but something that made my stomach clench and my saliva taste like copper pennies. My phone buzzed against my chest where I kept it in my shirt pocket. The screen showed my wife's name, Sarah, calling, for the third time in 2 hours. "Sarah, I'm working," I answered, trying to keep the exhaustion from my voice. "Jim, please. Lucy's fever hit 103.2. Dr. Morrison wants to admit her for observation." Sarah's voice carried that particular strain of a mother watching her child suffer. "She keeps asking for her daddy." I closed my eyes and felt my shoulders bunch up toward my ears. Lucy was 8 years old, my everything, and she'd been fighting what the doctors thought was a severe flu for 4 days. But Emma Rodriguez was out here somewhere, possibly injured, possibly dying, and I was the only ranger in this sector. "How long until Morrison makes the call?" I asked. "He wants to decide within the hour. Jim, I need you here. Lucy needs you here." The weight of my duty pressed against my chest like a steel plate. "Give me 2 more hours, Sarah, please. If I don't find something by then, I'll come straight to the hospital." 2 hours, she said, and I could hear her crying, but not a minute longer. The line went dead, and I stood there in the cathedral quiet of the forest, surrounded by trees that had been growing since before my great-grandfather was born, feeling like the worst father in Washington state. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong, like someone calling out, but distorted, stretched thin by distance and wind. I killed my radio squelch and listened. The sound came again, definitely human, definitely distressed from somewhere deeper in the woods. "Emma!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the massive tree trunks. "Emma Rodriguez, can you hear me?" The reply came back wrong. Too low, too long, like someone was calling through water or from the bottom of a deep cave. But it was definitely a response. I checked my GPS again and marked my position, then started pushing through the thick undergrowth toward the sound. My Danner boots squelched in the perpetually damp soil as I navigated around fallen logs thick as cars and ferns that reached my shoulders. The forest here felt different. Older somehow, more watchful. The trees seemed to lean inward as I walked, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even the October afternoon light barely penetrated. My peripheral vision kept catching movement that wasn't there when I turned to look, and the temperature felt like it had dropped 10 degrees in the space of 50 yards. That's when I found the first real sign of Emma. Her North Face jacket hung from a vine maple branch about 7 feet off the ground, torn along the back seam like something had grabbed her from behind and ripped it clean off. But here's what made my hands start trembling as I photographed it. There were no scuff marks on the tree bark where someone might have climbed to hang it there. No footprints beneath the tree. No indication of how a jacket could end up that high without leaving any trace of human passage. I keyed my radio. "Base Unit 7. I've located what appears to be the missing hiker's outer clothing in grid sector Charlie 5. Requesting immediate backup for evidence recovery. Over." "Copy, Unit 7. Unit 3 is approximately 20 minutes from your position. Do not disturb the scene. Over." But as I waited for backup, studying the impossible placement of Emma's jacket, I noticed something else that made my throat close up with dread. The undergrowth around the tree wasn't just disturbed, it was arranged. Broken branches and scattered leaves formed patterns, almost like symbols, radiating out from the base of the vine maple in concentric circles, and in the exact center of those circles, pressed deep into the moss-covered earth, was a footprint unlike anything I'd seen in 15 years of tracking in these woods. The print was human-shaped, but wrong in every dimension that mattered. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks extending from each toe. The depth of the impression suggested something much heavier than a human had made it, and the surrounding soil was stained dark with something that wasn't mud. I took photos from every angle, my hand steady despite the adrenaline now flooding my system. That's when the smell hit me again. That sick, sweet stench of meat left too long in the sun. But underneath it was something else. Something that made every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of wilderness work scream at me to run. The radio crackled. Unit 7, this is Unit 3. I'm about 10 minutes out. What's your exact situation? But before I could answer, I heard that call again, closer this time, maybe 100 yards deeper into the woods. And this time, I could make out the word it was trying to form. Help! But the voice that spoke it didn't sound like a 23-year-old woman from Seattle. It sounded like something learning to use human speech, getting the mechanics right but missing the essential humanity underneath. I've been married to Sarah for 12 years, and she knows me well enough to understand what my work means to me. The Olympic Peninsula isn't just my beat, it's my responsibility. When someone goes missing in my section of forest, they become my family until I bring them home. That's how I was raised, how my father raised me when he worked these same trails 30 years ago. But standing there in that too-quiet grove, holding Emma's torn jacket and staring at a footprint that belonged in no biology textbook I'd ever seen, I started to understand that some responsibilities come with a price higher than you're prepared to pay. The call came again, and this time I was certain it was closer, maybe 70 yards, moving toward me. I unsnapped the leather strap on my service pistol and started walking deeper into the Olympic wilderness, toward whatever was calling for help in Emma Rodriguez's voice. Behind me, the GPS coordinates on my Garmin read 47 degree 51 45 and 123 degree 56 42.8 W, marking the last place I had been just another forest ranger doing his job. Ahead of me lay something that would change everything I thought I knew about the woods I'd spent my career protecting. The forest floor ahead showed more signs of disturbance, not the random chaos of animals foraging, but deliberate arrangement of natural debris. Broken branches formed arrows pointing deeper into the woods. Stones had been stacked in small cairns that appeared almost ritualistic. And the smell was getting stronger, that nauseating mixture of decay and something else, something alive and hungry. I'd been a skeptic my entire career. When hikers reported strange sounds or unexplained sightings, I explained wind patterns and animal behavior. When campers claimed to see eyes watching them from the darkness, I talked about how human perception plays tricks in unfamiliar environments. I had rational explanations for everything the Olympic wilderness could throw at you. But Emma's voice was calling from somewhere ahead, and I knew with increasing certainty that whatever was using her voice wasn't Emma Rodriguez. My radio buzzed with Unit 3's approach, but I also knew that by the time backup arrived, I would have found either Emma or whatever had taken her. The trail of arranged debris was leading me somewhere specific, and the territorial part of my brain that had kept me alive through 15 years of dangerous wilderness rescues was screaming warnings I didn't want to acknowledge. I thought about Lucy in her hospital bed, fever burning through her small body while her mother sat helpless beside her. I thought about Sarah, who had married a man whose job sometimes meant choosing between family and duty, but who had never asked me to choose before today. And I thought about Emma Rodriguez, 23 years old, who had come to these woods for what should have been a peaceful hike, and who now existed only as a voice calling from deeper in the forest, if she existed at all. The arranged trail led to a clearing I'd never seen before. Despite 15 years of walking these woods, the space was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, surrounded by Douglas firs so massive their trunks formed a natural amphitheater. but it was what occupied the center of the clearing that stopped me dead and made my finger find the trigger of my Glock 22. A shelter of some kind, built from interwoven branches and what looked like strips of hide, stood about 8 feet tall in the center of the space. The construction was sophisticated but wrong, following no architectural logic I could identify, and hanging from the frame of this shelter, like decorations or trophies, were pieces of clothing and personal items I recognized from Emma's missing person report. Her hiking boots, her blue Seattle Mariners baseball cap, her silver bracelet with the small heart charm her mother had described to dispatch. But it was what surrounded the shelter that made my hands shake as I raised my weapon. Bones, arranged in the same concentric circles I'd seen around the vine maple, but these weren't animal bones. The femurs were too long, the skulls too large, the rib cages expanded beyond human proportion. And they weren't old. Tissue still clung to some of them, tissue that looked fresh and raw. "Emma!" I called out, my voice cracking with stress. "Emma Rodriguez, are you here?" The response came from inside the shelter, and this time there was no mistaking it for human speech. The sound that emerged was Emma's voice saying, "Help me." But the vocal cords producing it had been stretched and modified in ways that violated every law of anatomy I understood. I approached the shelter with my pistol drawn, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. The stench was overwhelming now, not just decay, but the smell of something alive and predatory, something that had been feeding on meat that fought back. The opening to the shelter faced away from me, hidden behind the structure's bulk. I circled around, keeping my weapon raised, and saw movement inside the shadowy interior. What emerged wasn't Emma Rodriguez. It might have been human once, in the same way that a wolf might have been a dog once. But whatever transformation had been worked on this creature had stretched it beyond recognition. It stood nearly 7 feet tall with limbs that had been elongated until the proportions screamed wrong to every part of my brain designed to recognize my own species. The skin was pallid and loose, hanging in folds where the bone structure beneath had been modified. And the face was still trying to be Emma's face. The basic features were there, stretched and distorted, but recognizable enough to make my stomach lurch with revulsion and pity. When it opened its mouth to speak, I could see that the teeth had been sharpened to points and the throat had been opened and restructured to accommodate the impossible vocal range it demonstrated. "Help me," it said in Emma's voice, and then immediately followed with, "Please don't hurt me," in the voice of a young man I didn't recognize, and then, "I have children at home," in the voice of a middle-aged woman. Each voice was perfect, each inflection captured with devastating accuracy. This thing had been collecting voices, and each one represented someone who had walked into these woods and never walked out. I keyed my radio with my left hand while keeping my pistol trained on the creature. "Base Unit 7, I need immediate backup at coordinates 47°5158.4 N, 123°5702.1 W. I've located the missing hiker, but the situation is critical. Over." The creature that had been Emma tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve and smiled with far too many teeth. "Your little girl is dying," it said in my wife's voice. Sarah's exact inflection, her exact tone of heartbreak and desperation. "Lucy needs her daddy." How it knew Sarah's voice, how it knew about Lucy, I couldn't begin to understand. But hearing my wife's words coming from that abomination's mouth triggered something primal and violent in my chest. "What are you?" I demanded. "Hungry," it replied in Emma's voice. Then, switching to a child's terrified whisper, "It hurts so much, Daddy." That last voice broke something inside me. I fired 3 rounds center mass, the gunshots echoing through the clearing like thunder. The creature staggered but didn't fall, and where the bullets had torn through its chest, I could see something moving underneath the skin, something that wasn't blood or bone. It laughed in a voice I recognized as my father's, dead now for 5 years. "Jimmy boy," it said with his exact cadence, his exact nickname for me. "You can't kill hunger." Then it charged. The thing moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move, covering the 20 feet between us in what seemed like a single bound. I dove to my left, rolling behind one of the massive Douglas firs, and heard claws gouging deep furrows in the bark where my head had been. I came up firing, emptying my magazine into the creature's torso and legs. Each bullet found its mark, but none of them seemed to slow it down. The wounds closed almost as quickly as they opened, and I could hear the bullets falling to the forest floor with dull metallic sounds as its body rejected them. My radio crackled with frantic voices. Dispatch trying to raise me, Unit 3 calling for my position, search and rescue teams mobilizing. But all of that seemed to be happening in another world. A world where the rules of biology and physics still applied. In this clearing, in this moment, I was face to face with something that had never been human, but had learned to wear humanity like a collection of masks. And it was still hungry. I reloaded while moving, putting another tree between myself and the creature. That's when I noticed something that might have been important. The bone arrangements around the shelter weren't random. They formed patterns, symbols, almost like a ritual circle. And at specific points around the circle, there were what looked like anchor points, places where other items had been buried or placed with deliberate intention. Unit 7, respond please. Unit 3's voice came through my radio, tense with concern. I keyed the mic. Unit 3, stay back. Do not approach my coordinates. This is not a normal rescue situation. The creature had disappeared behind the shelter, but I could hear it moving through the underbrush, circling around to flank me. Every few seconds it would call out in a different voice. Sometimes Emma, sometimes the young man, sometimes a child crying for help. Each voice was bait, designed to trigger the rescue instinct that had kept me walking into dangerous situations for 15 years. But now I understood what I was dealing with. Not just a predator, but something that fed on the human compulsion to help others. Something that had been luring rescuers and hikers into these woods for who knows how long, collecting voices and adding them to its repertoire. I thought about every missing person case from the past decade that had gone unsolved. Every hiker who had simply vanished without a trace. Every search that had ended with empty evidence bags and grieving families who never got closure. How many people had heard their loved one's voice calling from the forest and followed it to their death? My phone buzzed with another call from Sarah, but I couldn't answer it. Not with that thing still out there. Not when it had already demonstrated that it somehow knew my family's voices. If I answered, if it heard even a few seconds of our conversation, it would add Sarah's voice to its collection. And Lucy's. The thought of this creature using my daughter's voice to lure other families into these woods made my vision go red around the edges. I circled the shelter, looking for patterns in the bone arrangement that might tell me something useful. That's when I found the other items buried around the ritual circle, personal effects that didn't belong to Emma or any recent missing person. A class ring from 1987, a woman's wedding band with an inscription too worn to read, a child's toy car, the paint faded with decades of weathering. This thing had been hunting in these woods for a very long time. Unit 7, I'm 2 minutes out from your coordinates. Unit 3's voice came through the radio. I can hear gunshots. What's your status? Before I could answer, the creature emerged from behind a cluster of ferns about 30 yards away. But it wasn't alone anymore. Standing beside it, their faces showing the same impossible elongation and wrong proportions, were two other figures I recognized from missing person reports. David Kowalski, who had vanished while camping with friends in 2016, and Sarah Chen, a botanist who had been collecting specimens alone in these woods just last month. All three of them had been changed, stretched, modified into something that retained human characteristics while abandoning human limitations, and all three of them were smiling with too many teeth. Your partner's coming, the Emma thing said in my voice, perfect in every detail. Should we tell him you need help? That's when I realized that this creature, whatever it was, had been listening to my radio communications all along. It had heard every conversation between me and dispatch, every exchange with Unit 3. It knew that backup was approaching, and it was already planning how to add Unit 3 to its collection. I keyed my radio and spoke quickly. Unit 3, this is Jim Anderson. Do not approach these coordinates. There are multiple hostiles in the area, and they are not human. Repeat, not human. Maintain distance and call for Federal Wildlife Management backup. The three creatures tilted their heads in unison, and I could see intelligence in their eyes. Not animal cunning, but something that understood tactics and planning and patience. They had been hunting as a pack, coordinating their efforts, learning from each encounter to become more effective predators. "Jimmy boy," the David thing said in my father's voice, "you always were too smart for your own good." The Sarah thing laughed in my mother's voice, dead now for 3 years. "Come give Mama a hug." And the Emma thing smiled in Lucy's voice. "Daddy, I'm scared. Please come home." That last one nearly broke me, hearing my daughter's voice, her exact intonation when she was frightened, coming from the mouth of something that had probably eaten the real Emma Rodriguez piece by piece, made something snap inside my chest like a overstressed cable. I stopped trying to be a rational forest ranger following protocol and started being what my father had raised me to be, a man who protects what matters, no matter the cost. I started shooting again, not aiming for center mass this time, but for the bone anchor points around the ritual circle. My bullets shattered femurs and skulls that had been arranged with careful precision, disrupting the patterns that seemed to hold some kind of significance for these creatures. The effect was immediate and dramatic. All three of them shrieked, not in their collected human voices, but in sounds that came from somewhere much older and more primal than human vocal cords could produce. The shriek was answered from other parts of the forest, howls and calls that suggested this pack was larger than just the three creatures I could see. But as I destroyed more of the bone arrangements, I noticed that the creatures' movements became less coordinated, their speech less coherent. Whatever ritual or magic these arrangements represented, it was clearly connected to their enhanced abilities. Unit 7, this is base. Federal Wildlife Management is 20 minutes out. Can you maintain your position? 20 minutes. Against creatures that moved faster than Olympic sprinters and had been hunting these woods longer than I'd been alive. But I thought about Lucy in her hospital bed, about Sarah waiting for me to choose between duty and family, about all the families who had lost loved ones to these things over the decades. Base Unit 7, I'll maintain position, but I need you to understand something. These aren't normal predators. They're using human voices to lure victims. Anyone responding to this situation needs to ignore any calls for help they hear, no matter how convincing. Over. I kept moving around the clearing, using the massive trees for cover while systematically destroying the bone arrangements. Each destroyed symbol made the creatures less coordinated, more desperate, but it also made them more aggressive. The David thing rushed me again, and this time I was ready. I put 3 rounds into its left knee, shattering whatever passed for its leg bones. It went down hard, but even as it fell, the other 2 were flanking me from different directions. I dove behind the shelter itself, using the structure for cover while I reloaded again. That's when I noticed something carved into the wooden frame, symbols that looked almost like writing, but not in any alphabet I recognized. And beneath the symbols, scratched into the wood with what looked like fingernails, were names and dates. Emma Rodriguez, October 14th, 2018. That was 3 days ago. Sarah Chen, September 23rd, 2018. David Kowalski, July 8th, 2016. The list went back years, decades. Some of the names I recognized from missing person cases. Others were completely unknown to me, people who had vanished so completely that no one had ever reported them missing. And at the bottom of the list, scratched in fresh wood, was a name that made my blood freeze in my veins. James Anderson, October 17th, 2018, today's date. They had been planning to add me to their collection all along. This whole thing, Emma's disappearance, the arranged trail of clues, even the timing of my family crisis, had been orchestrated to bring me to this clearing on this specific day. "You understand now?" the Emma thing said, its voice back to its natural, horrible tone. "We've been watching you, Jimmy boy, learning your patterns, learning your family." The Sarah thing emerged from behind a tree, moving with that impossible fluid grace. "Your wife sounds so worried about little Lucy. Maybe we should pay them a visit after we finish here." That was the moment I stopped thinking like a park ranger and started thinking like a father whose family was being threatened by something that wore human faces like trophies. I emerged from behind the shelter and started shooting again, but this time I wasn't aiming for the creatures. I was aiming for the shelter itself, for the wooden frame covered in names and symbols. If this structure was the center of whatever ritual gave these things their power, then maybe destroying it would level the playing field. My bullets splintered the wood, shattering the carved symbols and sending fragments of the gruesome trophy collection scattering across the clearing. The creatures' shrieks became even more frantic, and I could see their forms beginning to waver, becoming less solid, less coherent. That's when I heard the sound of approaching vehicles. Unit 3 finally arriving, along with what sounded like multiple other units responding to the emergency call. But I also heard something else that made my heart sink. From the direction of the approaching vehicles came a voice calling out, Jim Anderson, I need help, please." It was Sarah's voice. Perfect in every detail, exactly the tone she used when she was scared and needed me to fix something. But Sarah was at the hospital with Lucy, 20 miles away from these woods, which meant the creatures had more voices in their collection than just the missing hikers. They had been collecting voices from families, from people who had never set foot in these woods but who had loved someone who did. "Unit 3, do not respond to any calls for help," I shouted into my radio. "They're using collected voices. Sarah Anderson is not in these woods." But I could already hear Unit 3 changing direction, heading toward what sounded like my wife calling for help. In a few minutes, these things would have a fresh park ranger to add to their collection. Someone else who had walked into their trap because his training told him to respond to calls for help. I made a decision that went against every principle of teamwork and backup that had been drilled into me during 15 years of service. I pulled the pin on my emergency flare, the one every ranger carries for marking landing zones or signaling aircraft, and threw it directly into the remains of the shelter. The magnesium burned white hot, igniting the dry wood and hide of the structure almost instantly. The fire spread quickly, feeding on materials that seemed almost designed to burn. As the flames rose higher, consuming the carved symbols and trophy collection, the three creatures began to change. Their elongated forms started to collapse in on themselves, as if the fire was somehow unmaking whatever transformation had changed them from human to monster. I could see David Kowalski's original face emerging from the distorted features of the David thing, see Sarah Chen's human proportions reasserting themselves as the creature that wore her form writhed in what looked like agony. But it was the Emma thing that transfixed me. As the fire burned hotter, consuming decades of collected trophies and ritual symbols, Emma Rodriguez's true form began to reassert itself. For just a moment I could see the 23-year-old hiker she had been, trapped inside the monster she had been transformed into. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw recognition, gratitude, and an intelligence that was entirely human. "Thank you," she whispered in her own voice, weak but real. "Tell my mother." Would go. But before she could finish, all three forms collapsed into ash and bone, leaving nothing but the burning remnants of whatever unholy structure had sustained their unnatural existence. The fire spread to the surrounding undergrowth, but October in the Olympic Peninsula meant everything was too damp to sustain a major blaze. Within minutes, the flames died down to smoldering embers, leaving behind a clearing that looked like any other patch of Pacific Northwest forest, except for the bones. Human bones, but human-sized now, scattered in random patterns instead of ritual arrangements. Bones that belonged to people who had been missing for years, decades, some of them probably since before I was born. Unit 7, I heard gunshots and saw flames. Unit 3's voice came through the radio, tense with concern. "Unit 3, this is Unit 7, I'm secure. The missing hiker is deceased, but I've located multiple sets of human remains that will require forensic recovery. And you're going to need to ignore any calls for help you hear on your way to my position. Trust me on this one." As I waited for backup to arrive, I sat down on a fallen log and finally answered my phone when Sarah called. "Jim, I heard on the scanner that there was some kind of incident in your sector. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said, and was surprised to find that it was true. "How's Lucy?" "Her fever broke about an hour ago. Dr. Morrison thinks she's going to be fine. She keeps asking when Daddy's coming home." "Soon," I promised. "Very soon." "What would you do in this situation?" Would you keep searching or turn back? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more supernatural ranger stories. But as I sat there waiting for backup, looking at the scattered bones of people who had been missing for decades, I started to understand something that would change how I approached my job forever. The Olympic Peninsula is vast, covering over 3,500 square miles of some of the most remote wilderness in the continental United States. And if creatures like this had been hunting here for decades, maybe centuries, there might be other clearings, other ritual sites, other collections of bones scattered throughout the forest. When Unit 3 finally arrived, along with the Federal Wildlife Management Team and eventually a full forensic recovery crew, I told them exactly what I had found. Human remains from multiple missing person cases, evidence of what appeared to be ritualistic behavior by an unknown predator, and signs of pack hunting that suggested a coordinated threat to hikers and campers. I didn't tell them about the voices. I didn't describe the transformations or the intelligence I had seen in those creatures' eyes. I let them draw their own conclusions about predators and scavengers, and the strange ways that nature can arrange bones. The forensic team eventually identified remains from 17 different people, some of them missing for over 30 years. 17 families finally got closure. 17 unsolved cases finally got marked as solved. The media called it the biggest break in missing person cases in Pacific Northwest history. But I knew it was just one collection site, just one pack. And as I filled out my incident reports and gave my statements to federal investigators, I started to understand that my job as a forest ranger had fundamentally changed. I wasn't just protecting hikers from bears and bad weather anymore. I was protecting them from things that had learned to hunt using their own instincts to help others against them. Things that could collect voices and use them like lures, drawing rescuers and family members into traps that might have been operating for generations. Over the following months, I started developing new protocols for search and rescue operations, new ways to verify the identity of people calling for help, new procedures for investigating missing person cases that took into account the possibility of coordinated, intelligent predation. Some of my supervisors thought I was developing PTSD from the Emma Rodriguez case. They suggested counseling, administrative leave, early retirement. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that someone needed to be watching for signs of similar threats. The Olympic Peninsula covers 3,500 square miles. Emma's clearing was just one small patch of that vast wilderness. And if there were other clearings, other collections, other packs using human voices to hunt human prey, then every missing person case needed to be investigated with the understanding that we might not be dealing with normal predators. I started a private database, tracking missing person cases across the Pacific Northwest for patterns that might indicate supernatural predation. I developed new search protocols that other rangers thought were unnecessarily paranoid, but that might save lives if they encountered something similar to what I had found. And I made a promise to myself, and to the memory of Emma Rodriguez. No one would walk into these woods unprepared for what might be waiting for them. Not on my watch. The world turned out to be a much stranger and more dangerous place than I had thought during my first 15 years as a forest ranger. But it was also a place where a single person, armed with the right knowledge and the determination to act, could make a difference between families getting closure and families waiting forever for loved ones who would never come home. Lucy recovered completely from her fever, and Sarah never questioned why I started coming home from work with a different look in my eyes. They just accepted that their husband and father had experienced something in the woods that had changed him, and they trusted me to use that change to protect other families. Because that's what family does. That's what community does. And that's what forest rangers do, even when the job description expands to include threats that no one wants to acknowledge exist. The Olympic Peninsula is still beautiful, still wild, still worth protecting. But now I protect it with the understanding that the greatest threats to human visitors might not be the ones that follow normal rules of biology and physics. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm doing paperwork in the ranger station, I hear voices calling from the woods. Voices asking for help. Voices that sound like people I know. Voices that trigger every instinct I have to grab my gear and start a rescue operation. But now I know to verify the source before I respond. Now I know to check with dispatch before I follow voices into the wilderness. Now I know that not every call for help comes from someone who actually needs to be rescued, because the worst predators are the ones that have learned to hunt using our own humanity against us. So there you have it, my encounter with the unknown. Did I handle it right? What would your next move be? Tell me in the comments and subscribe if you want more supernatural stories from the forest. My name is Jonathan Rivers, and in my 17 years as a ranger at Olympic National Park, I thought I'd seen everything. Bodies of climbers who fell from cliffs, remains of campers lost for weeks, even suicides in remote forest locations. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found that cold October of 2014. It was a Tuesday when everything started falling apart again. Not just the case I thought I'd closed 3 years ago, but also my marriage that had been hanging by a thread since Sarah discovered I still kept all the files about Jessica Coleman's disappearance in our garage. "You promised, John," she said that morning, with Emily, our 8-year-old daughter, eating cereal in the kitchen. "You promised you'd leave that obsession behind." My throat constricted like someone was tightening a rope around my neck. I had promised, yes. After the FBI took over the case in 2011 and filed it as unresolved disappearance, I swore I'd move on. But how do you forget a 19-year-old girl who simply vanished in the middle of the park's busiest trail? "It's different now, Sarah. We found something." She stopped with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "Found what?" I pulled from my folder the plastic evidence bag that Danny Martinez, one of the newer rangers, had handed me the night before. Inside was a silver bracelet with a crescent moon pendant, the same one Jessica wore in the last photos her family provided to the investigation. "Danny found this yesterday, buried almost 6 feet deep, at the base of a fir tree that was knocked down by last week's storm." Sarah went pale. Emily stopped chewing. 6 feet, Sarah. The tree had been there for at least 50 years, according to the rings we counted. It's physically impossible for the bracelet to have gotten there after 2011. The silence in the kitchen was broken only by the sound of the refrigerator kicking on. My wife set her cup on the table with a tremor in her hands she tried to disguise. "So, what does that mean?" "It means maybe Jessica was there long before she officially disappeared, or..." I stopped, because the other possibility was even more disturbing. Or someone buried the bracelet deliberately for it to be found. Emily dropped her spoon. "Daddy, why would someone do that?" I knelt beside her chair, feeling the familiar weight of my Glock 40 in its holster, the bronze badge cold against my chest. "I don't know, sweetheart, but Daddy's going to find out." Sarah pulled me into the hallway away from Emily. "John, please, don't do this again." Her eyes were red, as if she'd spent the night awake. "Last time it almost cost us our marriage. You became obsessed, couldn't sleep, barely talked to us." I knew she was right. During the 2 years of active investigation, I had transformed into a shadow version of myself, compulsively checking GPS coordinates, redoing the same trails dozens of times, questioning tourists until they complained to park management. But looking at that bracelet, I could feel the familiar tingling at the base of my neck that I always felt when something wasn't right in the forest. It was the same sensation that had saved me 3 years earlier, when a grizzly bear had been silently stalking me for over an hour. And it was the same sensation I'd ignored the day Jessica Coleman disappeared. "Just give me 1 week," I said, holding her hands. "If I don't find anything new, we file the case permanently, I promise." Sarah closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, there was tired resignation in them. "1 week, John. But if you start getting like last time, I'm taking Emily to my mother's house. And this time it'll be permanent." 2 hours later, I stood at the beginning of the Hoh River Trail, wearing my familiar green Forest Service jacket and carrying a 55-pound backpack with equipment I could recite from memory. Motorola GP340 radio, Garmin eTrex GPS, first aid kit, 3 liters of water, energy bars, streamlight flashlight, climbing ropes, and an improvised forensic kit I'd assembled with plastic bags, gloves, and a small folding shovel. The October air carried the penetrating smell of decomposing leaves mixed with the resinous aroma of Douglas firs that dominated this part of the forest. It was a smell I associated with home, but today there was something different. an underlying odor that my veteran ranger mind couldn't identify. Metallic, almost organic. Danny Martinez met me at the checkpoint, his young face tense with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. "Chief, I was thinking all night about that bracelet," he said, consulting a small notebook. "There's something I can't get out of my head." "Shoot." When I was digging around the fallen tree to see if there were more things buried, I found other weird stuff. He opened his backpack and pulled out another plastic bag. Small bones, lots of them, all broken in strange ways. I took the bag and examined the contents. They were bones from small animals, rabbits, squirrels, maybe some birds. But Danny was right about them being broken strangely. The fractures didn't look natural, like they were the result of predation or normal decomposition. They looked systematic. "How many did you find?" "Maybe 30, 40 bones, all within a 6-foot radius of the tree." He hesitated. "Chief, there's one more thing. I brought the metal detector as a precaution and, well, there's something big buried about 50 feet from the tree. Pretty deep. The detector almost went crazy when it passed over it." I felt my muscles tense involuntarily. In 17 years tracking lost people in these forests, I'd learned to trust instincts, and my instincts were screaming that something was deeply wrong. "Did you mark the location?" "Yes, sir. Coordinates 47.8606 degree N, 123.9348 degree W. It's right in the middle of the area where Jessica's family said she was going to camp." We checked our radios. Channel 16, frequency 151, 955 millihertz. Estimated range of 5 miles in this mountainous topography. Standard protocol for dual search operations. I tried calling base to report our position, but all I got was static cut by a sharp noise that made my teeth ache. "Strange interference," I muttered, adjusting the frequency. "Must be that solar storm the weather guys mentioned." We began the hike on the trail I knew better than the lines of my own hand. Jessica Coleman had disappeared at mile marker 6. 3 of the Hoh River Trail, in an area called 5 Mile Island, a small elevation surrounded by branches of the Hoh River that divided into multiple channels. It was a popular camping spot because it offered abundant fresh water and natural protection from winds. As we walked, I noticed the forest was strangely quiet. Normally, this trail vibrated with the sounds of at least 20 different bird species, squirrels running between trees, and the occasional distant call of an elk. Today, only the sound of our footsteps breaking small branches and the whisper of wind in the treetops. "Chief," Danny said after 40 minutes of walking, "did you notice we haven't seen any animals yet?" I had noticed, and I'd also noticed that my mouth was getting progressively drier, despite having drunk water regularly. It was a reaction I recognized from my time in Afghanistan, before becoming a ranger. My body preparing for conflict even when my rational mind hadn't yet identified the threat. When we reached the coordinates Danny had marked, the first thing I noticed was the smell. That metallic organic odor I'd detected subtly at the beginning of the trail was now much stronger. It wasn't the smell of dead animals. I knew that odor well. It was something different, something cleaner, more artificial. "There." Danny pointed to an area where the ground seemed to have been recently disturbed, despite the layer of leaves someone had obviously spread to disguise it. "That's where the metal detector went crazy." I pulled the folding shovel from my backpack and started digging. The earth was strangely soft, as if it had been turned recently, and after just 8 inches, my shovel hit something that definitely wasn't rock. Metal, cold and smooth. "Danny, come help me here." We worked for almost an hour, carefully digging around the metal object. As more earth was removed, we realized it wasn't just an object. It was a structure. A military green painted metal hatch with an iron wheel for opening and a small reinforced glass viewport. "What the hell?" Danny murmured, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the October cold. I used my flashlight to illuminate through the viewport. The glass was fogged from inside, but I could make out what appeared to be a narrow corridor descending toward the depths of the earth. "Chief, this looks military. Like Cold War stuff. He was right. I'd seen similar installations during my army training. Underground bunkers built during the nuclear paranoia of the 50s and 60s. But what would a military bunker be doing in the middle of Olympic National Park? And why didn't anyone in the official park records mention its existence? I tried the radio again. Just static. Danny, let's go back. We need to report this and come back with a bigger team. But Chief, what if Jessica's down there? What if... Safety protocol always comes first, I said. But even as I spoke, I knew we weren't leaving this place. Not today. There was something in that bunker that was connected to Jessica Coleman's disappearance. And after 3 years of sleepless nights and nightmares, I finally had a real lead. I gripped the iron wheel of the hatch. It was surprisingly well lubricated for something supposedly buried for decades. Just a quick look, I said, more to myself than to Danny. 5 minutes and we're out. The wheel turned easily, emitting only a slight metallic click. The hatch opened with a soft hiss as if there were equalized pressure between interior and exterior. And that's when the smell hit us. It wasn't decomposition. It was formaldehyde, preservation chemicals, and something else that made my stomach turn instantly. The sweet, sickening smell of blood that had been cleaned repeatedly but never completely removed. Danny stepped back, covering his nose and mouth with his jacket sleeve. Jesus Christ, Chief, what is that? My peripheral vision had narrowed to a tunnel, the way it always did when adrenaline flooded my system. My breathing became shallow and rapid, not from exertion, but from the primal recognition that whatever was down there had been designed to hurt people. Danny, we need to... A sound echoed from the depths of the bunker, not mechanical, not natural. Something between a wheeze and a chuckle, like air being forced through damaged vocal cords. Every instinct screamed at me to slam that hatch shut and run. But Jessica's face flashed in my mind, young, smiling in her last family photo, wearing that crescent moon bracelet we'd just found. If there was even a chance she was down there, alive or dead, I couldn't walk away. Stay close, I whispered, pulling out my streamlight and checking my sidearm. And if I say run, you run. Don't look back. The metal ladder leading down was slick with condensation that felt too warm for underground. Each rung echoed with a hollow clang that seemed to reverberate much deeper than the visible corridor suggested. My flashlight beam revealed concrete walls stained with dark streaks that my mind didn't want to identify. The corridor was exactly 6 feet wide and 8 feet tall, military standard dimensions for personnel movement. But the walls were wrong. Instead of the bare concrete I expected, they were lined with what looked like medical observation windows, small rectangular panes of reinforced glass, each about 2 feet by 1 foot, spaced every 10 feet along both sides. Chief, Danny's voice was barely a whisper behind me. There's something behind those windows. I directed my beam to the nearest window on the right. The glass was dirty, smeared with something that had dried to a brown crust. But through it, I could make out what appeared to be a small room, more like a cell. And in the corner, something pale and motionless. My mouth tasted like copper pennies. Not fear. I'd dealt with plenty of fear. This was something deeper. Recognition at a cellular level that human beings weren't meant to be in this place. Jesus, I breathed, pressing closer to the window. It was clothing. Jeans and a fleece jacket arranged in the corner as if someone had simply deflated out of them. But there were dark stains on the fabric that told a different story. Chief, look at this. Danny was examining a metal plate mounted beside the first window. It had numbers etched into it. Subject 001, collection date 08/23/2008, status terminated, collection date, not arrest date or arrival date. Collection. My hands were steady as I moved to the next window, but my legs felt disconnected from my body, like I was walking through thick water. The second cell contained what looked like camping gear scattered across the floor. A sleeping bag torn to shreds, a hiking boot with something dark dried inside it. Subject 02, collection date 11/15/2009, status experimental. I tried my radio again, knowing it was useless. The static was worse down here, punctuated by sounds that could have been voices or could have been my imagination slowly fracturing. "We need to keep moving," I said, though every fiber of my training told me to evacuate immediately. If Jessica's here, she's deeper in. The corridor continued for what felt like a quarter mile before opening into a larger chamber. My flashlight revealed a space that belonged in a hospital, not buried under a national forest. Stainless steel tables, cabinets full of medical instruments, and in the center, something that made my throat close completely. An operating table with restraints. Fresh restraints. The leather straps were clean and well-maintained, not the cracked, dry material you'd expect from decades of abandonment. Someone had been maintaining this place. Recently. "Danny, we need to..." A sound behind us made us both freeze. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the direction we'd entered. But that was impossible. We would have seen anyone following us down. I drew my weapon, the familiar weight of the Glock steadying my hands even as my heart rate spiked to what felt like 180 beats per minute. Danny fumbled for his radio, got the same useless static I'd been getting. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the medical chamber. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, cultured and calm, drifted from the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. "Ranger Rivers, I've been expecting you." The voice was coming from the far end of the chamber, from a doorway I hadn't noticed before. A doorway that definitely hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. "Who are you?" I kept my weapon trained on the darkness, but whatever was speaking remained hidden. "Someone who's been collecting specimens from your beautiful forest for a very long time." Jessica Coleman was particularly interesting. Strong survival instincts. She lasted almost 3 weeks in the conditioning chamber. My vision went white around the edges. Not anger, something beyond anger. Something that bypassed rational thought entirely. "Where is she?" "Oh, she's here. She's been here all along. Would you like to see what she's become?" A spotlight flicked on from somewhere above, illuminating a glass chamber against the far wall that I swear hadn't existed moments before. Inside, suspended in some kind of clear fluid, was a human figure. Female. Young. Wearing the remains of hiking clothes. And moving. Whatever was in that tank turned its head toward us with a fluid motion that was entirely wrong for something submerged in liquid. Its eyes, Jessica's eyes, locked onto mine through the glass. They were completely aware. Danny made a sound behind me that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. My training took over, pushing the horror into a compartment I could deal with later. "Let her go. Now." Laughter echoed from multiple directions simultaneously, as if the bunker itself was amused. "Oh, Ranger Rivers. You misunderstand completely. She doesn't want to be let go. Do you, Jessica?" The thing in the tank, Jessica, opened its mouth. No sound came out, but I could read the single word on her lips. "Run." The lights came on all at once, flooding the chamber with harsh fluorescent brightness that made my eyes water after the extended darkness. What they revealed turned my understanding of reality inside out. The room was massive, easily the size of an airplane hangar, and filled with dozens of the glass tanks I'd seen Jessica in. Each one contained a human figure in various stages of preservation. Some were clearly fresh. Others had been there long enough to show signs of change, modification. A man stepped out from behind the nearest tank, moving with the casual confidence of someone showing off a hobby room. He was perhaps 60, wearing what looked like expensive surgical scrubs and wire-rimmed glasses. Clean-shaven, well-groomed, the kind of person you'd trust to deliver your baby or perform your heart surgery. "Dr. Marcus Thorne," he said, extending a hand as if we'd met at a dinner party. "And your Rangers Rivers and Martinez. I've been following your careers with interest." Danny's breathing had become shallow and rapid beside me. I could smell his fear sweat mixing with the chemical odors that filled the chamber. "You're under arrest," I said, keeping my weapon trained on him, "for kidnapping, murder, and..." "Oh, please." Thorne waved dismissively. "Do you really think your little park service has jurisdiction here? This facility predates your precious Olympic National Park by 15 years. And I assure you, it has much more interesting oversight than your Department of the Interior. He walked to a control panel mounted on the wall and pressed several buttons. The glass tanks began to glow with an internal light that revealed details I immediately wished I hadn't seen. The figures inside weren't just preserved, they were being modified, limbs extended with mechanical components, organs visible through translucent skin, faces that retained human features but had been enhanced with additional sensory apparatus. 27 years of research, Thorne said proudly. Do you know how difficult it is to find suitable specimens in truly isolated conditions? Most parks have too much foot traffic, too many check-ins. But Olympic gives me hikers who disappear for weeks before anyone even files a report. I tried to process what I was seeing through my training and experience, but nothing in 17 years of law enforcement had prepared me for this. You're insane. Am I? Ranger Rivers, in 1987, your government asked me to develop methods for enhancing human survival capabilities in extreme environments. Cold War thinking. What if our soldiers needed to operate in conditions that would kill normal humans? What if we could create personnel who didn't need traditional supply chains? He gestured to the tanks like a proud father showing off his children. The program was officially terminated in 1993, funding cut, research sealed. But I'd made too many breakthroughs to simply stop. The forest provides everything I need: isolation, subjects, and most importantly, plausible deniability for disappearances. Jessica's tank was directly in front of me. Up close, I could see that whatever was preserving her also seemed to be changing her. Her fingernails had grown into something resembling claws. Her canine teeth were noticeably longer, but her eyes, Christ, her eyes were still completely, terrifyingly human. What did you do to her? Enhanced her, obviously, improved lung capacity for extended underwater operations, strengthened bone density, modified muscle fibers for superior strength and endurance. Jessica has become something far superior to what she was. She was a 19-year-old college student. She was raw material, and now she's a work of art. Danny finally found his voice. You sick fuck. Thorne looked genuinely puzzled. Sick? Gentlemen, I'm advancing human evolution by centuries. These specimens will be able to survive in environments that would kill baseline humans in minutes. They're the future of our species. I kept my weapon trained on him while scanning for exits. The chamber had multiple doorways, but they all seemed to lead deeper into the complex. The way we'd come in was the only path back to the surface. The bracelet, I said. You planted it to be found. Of course. After so many years, I was growing curious about the quality of your search and rescue operations. Jessica was one of my finest successes, and I wanted to see if you'd demonstrate the persistence necessary for my next phase of research. Next phase? Thorne smiled and for the first time looked genuinely enthusiastic. Willing subjects, the modifications are so much more successful when the specimen doesn't fight the process. I've been watching you, Ranger Rivers. Your dedication to finding lost people, your willingness to push beyond normal limits. You'd make an excellent addition to my collection. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about Jessica or about the other people in these tanks. This was about me. The entire discovery had been orchestrated to bring me here. Danny, move toward the entrance. Slowly. But Danny wasn't there. I risked a glance backward. The chamber behind me was empty except for the tanks and their horrific contents. Danny had simply vanished. Your partner is fine, Thorne said. The facility has multiple redundant security systems. He's merely been relocated to a safer location while we discuss your future. A sound echoed through the chamber. Danny's voice, screaming my name from somewhere that sounded very far away. Let him go, he's just a kid. Oh, I will. Assuming you're reasonable about your own situation. You see, Ranger Rivers, you have a choice. You can attempt to leave. Though I assure you the facility's security will prevent that, or you can stay and help me perfect the process that will save humanity. I thought about Sarah. About Emily eating cereal that morning, asking innocently why someone would bury a bracelet. About my promise to be home in a week. About the fact that my radio was dead, Danny was missing, and we were probably 100 feet underground with no one knowing where we were. What kind of help? Thorne's smile widened. You know these forests better than anyone. You understand human psychology under stress. Most importantly, you have access to search and rescue operations that could provide a steady stream of suitable subjects. You want me to help you kidnap people. I want you to help me save our species. The specimens who cooperate retain more of their original consciousness. Jessica, for instance, is still completely aware, still completely herself, just improved. As if responding to her name, Jessica pressed one hand against the glass of her tank. Her mouth moved again, but this time I could make out what she was saying. Help me. Not, help me escape, just help me. And that's when I realized the most horrifying truth of all. Part of her wanted to be there. Show me Danny, I said, keeping my voice level despite the fact that my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my weapon steady. Thorne pressed another button on his control panel. A monitor descended from the ceiling, displaying what looked like a small holding cell. Danny was there, sitting on a metal bench, apparently unharmed, but clearly terrified. He's in what I call an acclimation chamber. Completely safe, but it helps new arrivals adjust to the reality of their situation. Let him go. Keep me. Ranger Rivers, this isn't a negotiation. You're both here because you both have qualities that make you valuable. Your partner has excellent physical conditioning and psychological resilience. You have expertise and access. Why would I give up either advantage? On the monitor, Danny was examining the walls of his cell, running his hands along what appeared to be seamless metal surfaces. Even scared out of his mind, he was trying to find a way out. Kid had potential. Because, I said, if you keep us both, the Park Service will send a full search team when we don't report in. They'll find this place eventually. Will they? How exactly would they locate an unmarked Cold War facility that doesn't appear on any official records? Even if they somehow found the entrance, the facility has been modified with security measures that would discourage investigation. As if to demonstrate his point, Thorne pressed another button. On a different monitor, I could see the surface entrance we'd come through. The hatch was now completely sealed, and the ground above it had somehow been restored to look completely undisturbed. No trace that we'd ever been there. Motion sensors, automated camouflage systems, and if necessary, defensive measures. This installation has been designed to remain undetected indefinitely. I looked again at Jessica in her tank. She was watching me intently, and I realized she was trying to communicate something. Her hand was pressed against the glass, but she was moving her fingers in a pattern. Not random movement, deliberate gestures. Morse code. I'd learned it in the Army, but it took me a moment to remember the patterns. Dot 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 dash. V dash dot dash dash. Y, 3 dots, S. VYS. It didn't make sense until I realized she wasn't spelling in English. She was spelling in code. Ranger Rivers, I need your decision. Join my research voluntarily, and you'll retain more of your original consciousness throughout the enhancement process. Refuse, and I'll simply proceed with involuntary modification. The end result will be the same, but the experience will be far less pleasant. Jessica's fingers kept moving. Dot dash dot dot L dot E dash dot dash dot Y. Voisley. Still didn't make immediate sense, but something about it nagged at my memory. What happens to the people who don't survive the process? Regrettable wastage, but necessary for scientific progress. Perhaps 15% of subjects experience catastrophic rejection of the modifications. Their remains are disposed of in the forest, where natural decomposition eliminates any evidence. 15%. If Thorne had been operating since the late 1980s, and if he'd been taking an average of 2 people per year, that was almost 40 people. And Jessica was just one of dozens currently in tanks. How many people have you taken? 67 successful collections over 27 years, not counting the early experimental failures, of course. 67 families who never got answers. 67 people who'd walked into the forest and simply vanished. And I was looking at what was left of them. Jessica's hand moved again, this time more urgently. A O 6 AO6 military grid reference format. She was giving me coordinates. The modification process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, Thorne continued. Physical enhancement occurs first. Improved strength, endurance, sensory acuity. Mental conditioning follows. Most subjects find the psychological adjustments more challenging than the physical ones. Jessica kept spelling. --4 S Y AO6 4SY Alpha Oscar 6 4 Sierra Yankee military coordinates for something. Then it hit me. She wasn't just giving me coordinates. She was telling me how to get out. I need time to think, I said. Of course, but not too much time. The enhancement process is most successful when subjects are introduced gradually to the procedure. Prolonged stress before modification can cause complications. Thorne walked to another control panel and made some adjustments. The lighting in the chamber dimmed slightly, and a soft humming sound began emanating from the tanks. Feeding time, he explained. The preservation fluid provides all necessary nutrients, but the process requires careful monitoring. I watched as something was pumped into Jessica's tank. The fluid became slightly cloudier, and Jessica's eyes closed briefly. When they opened again, they seemed more focused, more alert. The subjects remained conscious throughout the preservation process, Thorne said. It's necessary for proper neural integration. They can hear, they can think, they can even communicate in limited ways. It's really quite fascinating. You're torturing them. I'm evolving them. Ranger Rivers in 50 years, when climate change and environmental collapse make most of the planet uninhabitable, these enhanced humans will be the only ones capable of survival. I'm not a monster, I'm a savior. I thought about Emily asking why someone would bury a bracelet, about Sarah threatening to leave if I became obsessed again, about my promise to be home in a week, about the fact that if I died down here, they'd never know what happened to me. I'll do it, I said. I'll help you, but I want guarantees. What kind of guarantees? Danny goes free. You release him somewhere in the forest, far enough away that it'll take him time to bring help, but close enough that he'll survive. And my family, they get an explanation, a body, something that gives them closure. Thorne considered this. Acceptable. Your partner will be released at the Staircase Rapids trailhead, approximately 8 hours of hiking from here. By the time he could guide a rescue team to this area, you'll be well into the enhancement process. And my family? A hiking accident. Very tragic. Body lost in the river. These things happen in the wilderness. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough. Danny would survive. Sarah and Emily would grieve, but they'd have closure. And maybe, just maybe, Danny would remember enough details about this place to eventually lead someone back here. All right, I said. Let's do this. Thorne's smile was genuinely pleased. Excellent. You've made the right choice, Ranger Rivers. In a few weeks, you'll understand what a gift this really is. He moved toward another control panel, and I tensed, ready to make my move. Because I'd lied, of course. I had no intention of voluntarily becoming one of his experiments, but I needed him to believe I was cooperating long enough to figure out what Jessica had been trying to tell me. AO6 4SY. Military coordinates. But coordinates for what? Thorne led me through another doorway into what appeared to be a preparation chamber. Medical equipment lined the walls. IV stands, monitoring devices, surgical instruments arranged with the precision of someone who'd done this many times before. The initial phase involves sedation and preliminary scans, he explained, gesturing to what looked like an MRI machine. We need detailed baseline data before beginning the enhancement process. I nodded, trying to appear cooperative while mentally mapping the chamber. 3 exits. The way we'd come in, another door marked with a radiation symbol, and what looked like a service hatch in the ceiling. Doctor, before we start, can I see Danny? Just to make sure he's okay? Of course, Family connections are important to maintain psychological stability during the process. He activated another monitor. Danny was still in his cell, but now he was pacing, clearly agitated. He'd found something. He was holding what looked like a small piece of metal, examining it closely. "He's more resourceful than I expected," Thorne murmured. "Good specimens often are." On the screen, Danny looked directly at the camera. He held up the piece of metal and I could see it was shaped like an arrowhead. He pointed toward something outside the camera's field of view, then made a gesture I recognized from our training. Hand signal for exit found. Thorne hadn't noticed. He was busy preparing a syringe with what I assumed was the sedative. "Doctor, what exactly did you mean by AO64SY? Thorne froze, syringe halfway to an IV bag. "What did you say?" "I was looking at one of your equipment labels. Military designation looked like AO64SY. Was this place built during Operation something?" I was fishing, but his reaction told me I'd hit something important. Thorne's face had gone pale, and he was staring at me with something approaching panic. "How do you know that designation?" "Military training, Army Corps of Engineers. We had to memorize Cold War facility codes." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Thorne set down the syringe and moved to a different control panel. AO6 was the original project designation. 4SY was... He paused. "That was the emergency evacuation protocol. Emergency evacuation protocol." Jessica hadn't been giving me random coordinates. She'd been telling me how to get out. "Ranger Rivers, where exactly did you see that designation?" "Equipment label near Jessica's tank." "Why? Is it important?" Thorne was typing rapidly on a keyboard. Multiple monitors came to life, showing various parts of the facility. On one screen, I could see the chamber where we'd found Jessica and the other tanks. On another, Danny's cell. On a third, something that made my blood freeze. Armed figures in tactical gear, moving through what looked like the upper levels of the facility. "That's impossible," Thorne muttered. The perimeter sensors showed no intrusion. But I could see at least 6 figures, moving with the precision of a trained assault team. And one of them was wearing the distinctive uniform of a National Park Service ranger. "Doctor, I think we have a problem." Thorne was frantically typing commands. "The security systems should have prevented this. Motion sensors, automated defenses. Nothing should have been able to penetrate the facility without triggering countermeasures. Unless someone knew the emergency evacuation protocol. Unless someone knew exactly how to bypass the security systems. Doctor, who else knew about AO64SE? No one. The original research team was terminated when the project was officially shut down. I'm the only survivor." On the monitor, the tactical team had reached what looked like the main chamber. They were setting up some kind of equipment, explosives maybe, or cutting tools. "Are you sure you're the only survivor?" Thorne's hands had stopped moving over the keyboard. He was staring at the monitors with an expression of growing horror. "There was one other researcher, Dr. Elena Vasquez, but she was killed in a car accident in 1993, just after the project termination." "Are you absolutely certain she was killed?" On the screen, one of the tactical team members turned toward the camera. Even through the grainy security feed, I could see it was a woman, probably in her 60s, with short gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Thorne's face went completely white. "Elena," he whispered, and that's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't a rescue operation. This was a cleanup operation. After 27 years, someone had finally decided that Dr. Marcus Thorne's unauthorized research needed to be permanently shut down. The question was, would they consider Danny and me witnesses to be protected, or loose ends to be eliminated? "Doctor, we need to get out of here. Now." But Thorne was staring at the monitors in fascination rather than fear. "Do you know what this means, Ranger Rivers? Elena survived. She's been out there for 30 years, probably continuing the research on her own, and now she's come back. That's not rescue gear they're carrying. No, it's not." Thorne moved to another panel and began activating what looked like emergency systems. Red lights began flashing throughout the chamber. But it doesn't matter. The facility has final stage containment protocols. What kind of containment protocols? The kind designed to ensure that certain research never falls into the wrong hands. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. On the monitors, I could see the tactical team reacting to the emergency signals, moving faster now, more urgently. "Doctor, please tell me you're not about to do something catastrophically stupid." Thorne looked at me with the expression of a man who'd already made peace with his choices. "The research is too important to lose, Ranger Rivers. If I can't continue it, then no one can." He reached for a red switch protected by a clear plastic cover. And I finally understood what Jessica had really been trying to tell me. Not just coordinates for an emergency exit, coordinates for getting out before the whole place went up. I tackled Thorne before he could reach the switch, but the man was stronger than his 60-year-old frame suggested. We hit the floor hard, rolling between medical equipment as alarms continued wailing throughout the facility. "You don't understand," Thorne shouted over the noise. 30 years of research, I can't let them destroy it." I managed to pin him down, using techniques from my military training, but he kept struggling toward the control panel. "Doctor, if you trigger whatever that is, you'll kill everyone in here, including your specimens." That stopped him. For a moment, his struggles ceased, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "The preservation systems have emergency power," he said finally. "They'll survive. But the research data, the equipment..." On the monitors, the tactical team had reached the chamber with the tanks. The woman I'd seen, Dr. Elena Vasquez apparently, was examining Jessica's tank with what looked like professional interest rather than rescue urgency. "She's not here to save them," I realized aloud. "She's here to take over." Thorne's expression shifted from panic to fury. "That bitch, I knew she wasn't dead. 30 years she's been planning this." The monitor showed Vasquez connecting some kind of device to Jessica's tank. Other team members were doing the same with the remaining specimens. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't destruction. It was extraction. "They're stealing your research. They're stealing everything." I made a decision that probably violated every protocol I'd ever learned, but seemed like the only option that might keep everyone alive. "Doctor, help me get to Danny and Jessica. We'll figure out the rest later." Thorne stared at me. "You want to rescue them?" "I want to get out of here alive. All of us, including your specimens." For a moment, I thought he was going to refuse. Then he nodded. "The service corridors. Elena won't know about the modifications I made after the project ended." He led me to the service hatch I'd noticed earlier. It opened onto a narrow maintenance tunnel that ran parallel to the main corridors. We crawled through ductwork that smelled of machine oil and recycled air, following Thorne's directions toward Danny's holding cell. "Ranger Rivers," Thorne said as we crawled, "I need you to understand something. Whatever Elena is planning, it's not rescue. She was always more aggressive in her approach to human enhancement." "Meaning what?" "Meaning I preserved voluntary consciousness during modification. Elena believed consciousness was an impediment to true enhancement." I thought about Jessica's aware, terrified eyes, about her desperate attempts to communicate. She's going to lobotomize them. In layman's terms, yes. We reached a junction in the maintenance tunnel. Through a ventilation grate, I could see Danny's cell. He was standing near the door holding what I now realized was a makeshift lockpick he'd fashioned from the metal piece I'd seen earlier. Thorne opened a hidden panel and pressed several buttons. Danny's cell door clicked open. "Danny," I called through the grate. "Up here." He looked around frantically until he spotted us through the ventilation grate. "Chief, what the hell is going on?" "Long story. Can you reach that grate?" Danny was tall enough to reach the ventilation opening. With some maneuvering, we managed to get him into the maintenance tunnel. "Chief, there are armed people in the facility. I saw them on a monitor in my cell." "We know. We're getting out. But first we need to..." An explosion echoed through the facility, followed by the sound of gunfire. On Thorne's portable monitor, we could see chaos in the main chamber. The tactical team was engaged in a firefight with what looked like automated defense systems. Ceiling-mounted weapons had deployed and the air was filled with smoke and debris. Elena always was impatient, Thorne muttered. But the defense systems weren't winning. One by one, the automated weapons were being destroyed by precise gunfire, and the team was still working on extracting the specimens. Doctor, how do we get to the tank chamber from here? We don't. The main corridors are blocked by the battle, but... He paused, studying his monitor. There might be another way. What kind of other way? The original excavation created several natural cave systems. I incorporated them into the facility design. There's a passage that connects to the old mine shaft about a mile west of here. That's not getting us to Jessica. No, but it's getting us out alive. Ranger Rivers, those specimens have been in preservation for years. Moving them now, without proper preparation, will kill them. I thought about Jessica's eyes, about her desperate Morse code message, about the promise I'd made to her family 3 years ago to find her. I'm not leaving her. Then you're choosing to die. Another explosion shook the facility. On the monitor, I could see that Vasquez's team had successfully detached several of the tanks and was moving them toward what looked like a large freight elevator. There, I pointed at the screen. Where does that elevator go? Thorne squinted at the display. Surface extraction point, about half a mile northeast of the original entrance. Can we get there through your cave systems? Possibly, but Ranger Rivers, even if we intercept them on the surface, what then? They're heavily armed, we have one sidearm, and they have professional training. Then we better hope backup arrives soon. I activated my radio, knowing it was probably useless but trying anyway. To my surprise, I got a clear signal. Base, this is Rivers. Emergency situation at coordinates 47.860, 6 degrees N, 123. 9348 dig W, armed hostiles, multiple casualties possible. Request immediate backup and medical support. The response was immediate. Rivers, this is Chief Morrison. We've been trying to reach you for 6 hours. We have a full search team en route to your last known position. 6 hours. We'd been underground for 6 hours, though it felt like 20 minutes. Chief, be advised that hostiles are heavily armed and have access to military-grade equipment. Approach with extreme caution. Copy that, Rivers. ETA 20 minutes. Can you reach a safe position? I looked at Danny, then at Thorne. Working on it, Chief. Thorne was studying his monitor intently. They're moving faster than I expected. If we're going to intercept them, we need to leave now. What about the self-destruct system? Elena's probably disabled it by now. She designed most of the security protocols. Another explosion, and this time the lights flickered. Whatever battle was happening in the main facility was escalating. All right, I said. Lead the way to your cave system. But I'm warning you, Doctor. If we get out of this alive, you're going to spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Thorne's smile was oddly peaceful. Ranger Rivers, if we get out of this alive, I'll consider that a fair trade. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom in Seattle, watching Dr. Marcus Thorne accept a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The judge called his crimes an unconscionable violation of human dignity and scientific ethics. The media called it the largest serial kidnapping case in Pacific Northwest history. I called it the beginning of the end of my old world. We'd made it out of the bunker, barely. Thorne's cave system led to an old mining tunnel that emerged about 2 miles from the original entrance. By the time we reached the surface, Chief Morrison's search team was already in position. But Vasquez and her tactical team were gone, and they'd taken 12 of the preserved specimens with them, including Jessica. The FBI took over the investigation immediately. The bunker complex was sealed, the remaining specimens were transferred to a federal medical facility for evaluation, and everyone involved was sworn to secrecy under the National Security Act. Officially, Dr. Marcus Thorne was a deranged individual who'd operated independently. Unofficially, 3 different federal agencies were frantically trying to figure out who Dr. Elena Vasquez really was and where she'd taken the specimens. Danny quit the Park Service 2 weeks after our testimony. Last I heard, he was working as a wilderness guide in Montana. about as far from government oversight as he could get while still doing outdoor work. Sarah and Emily, that was more complicated. "You promised me 1 week," Sarah said the night I came home from debriefing. "It's been 8 days." I told her everything I was legally allowed to tell her, which was almost nothing. A disturbed individual, a hidden facility, a rescue operation that saved multiple lives. I couldn't tell her about the specimens, about the preservation tanks, about Jessica's aware eyes staring at me through cloudy fluid. "But you found her? You found Jessica Coleman?" "We found where she'd been taken, and we made sure it could never happen again." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't exactly the truth either. Sarah knew I was holding something back, but she also knew the expression I got when something was classified beyond my ability to discuss. "Is it over?" That was the question that kept me awake at night. Because 3 weeks after Thorne's arrest, another hiker disappeared in the North Cascades. And 2 weeks after that, a backpacker vanished in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. Different parks, different jurisdictions, but the same pattern. Experienced outdoors people who simply walked into the wilderness and never came out. The FBI assured me there was no connection, but I knew better, because I'd seen the look in Vasquez's eyes on that security monitor. She wasn't shutting down Thorne's research, she was expanding it. "John?" Sarah was waiting for an answer. "For us it's over," I said. "But Sarah, I need you to understand something. There are things in those forests that aren't in any ranger manual, things that official reports don't mention, and if people are going to keep disappearing, then someone needs to be watching for patterns that others might miss." 3 months later, I accepted a transfer to a new position that didn't officially exist: Special Investigations Coordinator for the Pacific Northwest Regional Office. My job was to review unusual missing persons cases across multiple national forests and parks, looking for patterns that might indicate organized criminal activity. Officially, I was tracking human traffickers and drug operations that used federal lands for illegal activities. Unofficially, I was hunting for Dr. Elena Vasquez in her mobile laboratory. My first case file was a 17-year-old geology student named Marcus Chen, who disappeared while collecting rock samples in Olympic National Forest. The last entry in his field notebook was a sketch of what he described as an artificial structure partially buried near Whiskey Bend Trail. His GPS coordinates put him less than 5 miles from where we'd found Thorne's bunker. I opened my laptop and started typing my initial report. Outside my office window, I could see the Olympic Mountains rising into a gray October sky. Somewhere in those forests, Elena Vasquez was continuing research that would redefine what it meant to be human. And somewhere in a preservation tank, Jessica Coleman was still alive, still aware, still hoping someone would come for her. I thought about Emily, asking why someone would bury a bracelet to be found. The answer was simple: to lure the right person to the right place at the right time. The question that haunted me was, who was being lured now? And what were they hoping to catch? I picked up my phone and dialed Danny's number in Montana. "Danny, it's John. I need to ask you something about that metal detector reading you got at the burial site." "Chief? I thought we weren't supposed to talk about..." "This is different. How many other readings did you get that day? Readings you might not have mentioned because they seemed unimportant?" A long pause. "Chief, there were at least 6 other hits, all of them deeper than the bunker entrance, all of them spread across maybe a 20-mile radius. 6 other bunkers. That's what I was thinking. But Chief, there's something else. I went back there last month, just couldn't stop thinking about it, you know?" I did know. The readings are different now. Stronger, like whatever's down there is active. I thought about Vasquez's tactical team, about their precision and equipment, about how easily they'd penetrated Thorne's supposedly impregnable facility, about the fact that they'd known exactly where to find what they were looking for. "Danny, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to be very careful about who you tell." "What kind of something?" "Pack like you're going on a week-long backcountry expedition and drive to Seattle. There's something I need to show you." "Chief, I don't think I can..." "Danny, they took 12 people. 12 people who are still alive, still aware, still hoping someone will find them, and I think I know where they are. Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there tomorrow. I hung up and looked again at Marcus Chen's case file. At the GPS coordinates that placed his last known location uncomfortably close to one of Danny's metal detector readings. The old world had rules. People who disappeared in the wilderness were either found or declared dead. Cases were solved or they were closed. Rangers found lost hikers or they found bodies. The new world had different rules. People who disappeared became something else entirely. Cases were never really closed because the victims never really died. And rangers like me were hunting for things that shouldn't exist, trying to save people who might not want to be saved. I thought about Jessica and her tank, spelling out coordinates in Morse code. She wasn't just giving me directions to an exit. She was giving me directions to find the others. All I had to do was follow them. Author's note. This story explores themes of government experimentation, human enhancement, and the hidden dangers that might lurk in our most protected natural spaces. While the Olympic National Park depicted here is fictional, the real Olympic National Park is a beautiful and safe destination for hikers and outdoor enthusiasts. Any resemblance to actual secret facilities, living or dead, is purely coincidental.